Nova staggered, his frail legs trembling violently beneath the strain of his own weight. Each step seemed like a battle, his hooves scraping against the unyielding ground as though testing its resolve. Slowly, painstakingly, he pushed forward, his muscles quivering with every movement. Finally, with a little effort, he could step across the hard ground, leaving clear hoofprints behind him. "You did it," Lucia softly exclaimed. Her heart was filled with pride, not only because of Nova's progress, but also because her faith in him had been miraculously vindicated. The horse that was once despised and weak at auction now shows the first signs of joy. She still remembered that the auction that day was very chaotic, filled with voices and the sound of hammers clashing. Men crowded around the finest horses, their polished coats glistening under the harsh noon sun. Excitement buzzed as buyers raised their bids, vying for animals of strength and speed. The air smelled of sweat and ambition. In stark contrast, Nova had been tucked away in a shadowy corner of the lot, nearly invisible among the show horses. Lucia had only noticed him because she was searching for something, or perhaps someone, different. She was drawn by the stillness in the corner, her gaze landing on the skeletal figure of a horse, his ribs pronounced, his head bowed low. His coat, once white, was marred by dirt and patches of neglect. Nearby, Alaric, the horse's owner, stood with arms crossed, his expression a mix of irritation and resignation. "No one wants him," he muttered under his breath, loud enough for a few chuckles from the men around him. Last chance before the butcher. As Nova was led into the main yard, the crowd burst into laughter. "You call that a horse?" someone jeered. Alaric smirked, raising his voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, it's so cheap. It'll be worth it soon." Lucia stared at the frail horse before her. A memory, vivid and aching, rose unbidden in her mind. Years ago, on her family's farm, there had been another horse. An old, weary creature with a coat dulled by time, but a spirit untouched by hardship. The horse, though old and weak, still tried its best to pull the cart after each harvest. The loss of that horse had left a hollow place in her heart, one she thought would never heal. Now, as she looked into Nova's defeated eyes, she felt the weight of that absence shift into something new. The laughter turned to apathetic murmurs. No hands went up. Alaric shrugged, his patience clearly wearing thin. "Fine, butcher." "No!" Lucia's voice cut through the chatter. She stepped forward, ignoring the amused looks and muttered comments. "I'll take it." Alaric raised an eyebrow, his face a mixture of surprise and happy. "Are you serious?" He looked her up and down, taking in her dusty boots and simple dress. "Your money, your problem." Lucia didn't flinch. She pulled out a small bag, the coins inside jingling as she handed it to him. Her savings, scraped together from odd jobs on the farm. But she didn't hesitate, and Nova became her horse, despite the voices saying she was crazy to buy this useless horse. The truck rumbled along the dirt road, a fine cloud of dust trailing behind it in the afternoon sun. Raphael's hands gripped the wheel tightly, his weathered face betraying neither approval nor doubt, though his silence was thick with unspoken words. Lucia sat beside him, glancing back every so often at the trailer hitched to the truck. Inside, Nova lay on its side, too weak to stand for long. The rhythmic clatter of hooves against the wooden floorboards was the only sound from the horse, but it was enough to remind Lucia why she had chosen this path. She straightened her shoulders and stared ahead, determined not to let her grandfather's doubt weigh her down. When they reached the ranch, Raphael pulled the truck to a halt near the old barn. He climbed out first, his boots crunching on the dry ground. Slowly, he unlatched the trailer, peering inside. His sharp eyes swept over Nova's emaciated frame, taking in the tangled mane, the patchy fur, and the faint scars on its legs. "You're sure about this, girl?" he finally said, voice low and clipped. Lucia didn't answer immediately. Instead, she moved to the trailer, speaking softly to the horse as she coaxed it to its feet. Nova stumbled but managed to stand with shaky legs. Lucia looked up at her grandfather and held his gaze. "I am," she said simply. Raphael shook his head, but said no more. Together, they eased Nova down the ramp and into the barn, settling it in a stall that hadn't been used in years. The scent of hay and aged wood mingled in the air. The next morning began Lucia's long, unyielding routine. Nova's frailty required her full attention. She prepared a mash of grains, oats, and supplements, carefully measuring each portion. While Nova ate slowly, she worked on cleaning its wounds. She remembered her grandmother's advice. Patience isn't just a virtue, it's the only way to heal. Gathering the leaves of Loc Vang from the small herb garden, she crushed them into a thick paste with honey. The cool, sticky mixture was applied gently to Nova's sores, her touch deliberate and calming. It wasn't easy. The horse flinched at first, nostrils flaring and muscles tensing, but Lucia murmured soothing words, her tone steady. When she finished applying the treatment, she reached into her bag for the old harmonica her grandmother had passed down. The first notes were tentative, uncertain, much like Nova itself. But as the melody picked up, a soft, lilting tune, Nova stopped fidgeting. Its ears twitched toward the sound, its eyes half closing as if the music was as much a balm as the salve on its wounds. By the end of the week, a rhythm had formed. Lucia played harmonica every time she tended to Nova, and the horse, though still weak, began to lean into her touch. It lifted its head when she approached, ears pricking forward. The neighbors, however, were less enchanted. They whispered when they saw her hauling supplies or spending hours at the barn. "She's wasting her time," one said. "That horse is a lost cause." But Lucia didn't let their words reach her heart. She had made her choice, and she intended to see it through. As the days turned into weeks, even Raphael couldn't ignore the subtle changes in Nova. The horse began to eat more readily, its movements less hesitant. Raphael, who had kept his distance at first, started to linger longer by the barn. One evening, as Lucia struggled to replace a water bucket, he stepped forward without a word and lifted it with practiced ease. "I see you've been doing more than just feeding it," he remarked, his tone grudgingly approving. Lucia smiled, the first sign of a shared understanding between them. From that point on, Raphael offered his help more freely. He showed Lucia how to brush Nova's coat to encourage circulation and explained the importance of routine when dealing with a nervous animal. His years of experience working with horses surfaced naturally, though he often delivered advice with a dry wit that made Lucia chuckle despite her exhaustion. One crisp morning, the breakthrough came. Lucia entered the barn to find Nova standing steadily, its stance firmer than she had ever seen. She opened the stall door cautiously, extending a hand. Nova stepped forward, taking slow but confident strides toward her. A laugh escaped her, soft and astonished, as she watched the horse move around the small enclosure. Raphael appeared at the barn door, his arms crossed. He didn't say anything, but the faintest of smiles tugged at the corners of his mouth. Lucia didn't need his words. She saw his approval in his eyes and in the way he lingered as Nova took its first steps toward recovery. For the first time, she felt a glimmer of certainty that the impossible might just be within reach. The days passed slowly, each one marked by the quiet determination of Lucia and the steady progress of Nova. As the first rays of sunlight brushed across the fields, Lucia was already at work. Her mornings began with carefully prepared meals for Nova, a mixture of grains, fresh vegetables, and a blend of herbs she'd learned about from her grandmother's old farm journals. This was no ordinary feed. It was tailored to restore strength to Nova's weakened frame. As she placed the food in his stall, Nova greeted her with a soft nicker, a sound that had become increasingly frequent as his trust in her deepened. After breakfast, their training began. Lucia believed in starting slow and steady. They walked side by side along the dirt path behind the barn, where the land opened up into rolling hills. These walks were not just for exercise, they were moments of connection. Nova's gait, once hesitant and uneven, grew more confident with each step. Occasionally, he would stop and glance at her, his deep brown eyes seeming to ask if he was doing well. "You're doing great, boy," she'd say softly, running her hand along his neck. Weeks turned into months, and the transformation was undeniable. Nova's coat, once dull and matted, now shimmered in the sunlight. His muscles, long hidden beneath his frail frame, had begun to take shape, and there was a new energy in his movements. It was as if he had rediscovered himself, and with that came a spark in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Neighbors who once doubted Lucia's decision now stopped by the fence, watching in quiet awe as Nova trotted with strength and purpose. But the physical changes were only part of the story. Nova's spirit had been as broken as his body when Lucia first brought him home. Rebuilding his trust took time and patience. Every evening, after the day's work was done, Lucia would sit outside his stall with an old harmonica she'd found in a dusty drawer. She'd play simple tunes, the soft notes filling the quiet air of the barn. At first, Nova would only twitch his ears, unsure of the sound. Gradually, he began to relax, lowering his head and letting out contented breaths as the music played on. It became their ritual, a shared moment of peace that strengthened their bond. Over time, Nova began seeking Lucia's company, even outside of their routine. He would nudge her shoulder gently as she worked in the barn, or follow her with his steady gaze when she moved about the paddock. Their connection went beyond mere owner and horse. It was as though they had become partners, each drawing strength from the other. One crisp autumn evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Lucia sat on a bale of hay beside Nova's stall. She spoke to him, as she often did, sharing her dreams and hopes for the future. "I've been thinking, Nova," she said, her voice soft but steady. "There's a competition coming up, a real chance for us to show everyone what you can do." Nova stood quietly, his ears flicking toward her voice, his eyes fixed on her as if he understood every word. The idea of entering Nova into a competition was ambitious, but Lucia was not one to shy away from a challenge. She spent the following weeks researching local events, learning the rules, and studying the requirements. She mapped out a training plan that balanced strengthening Nova's abilities with ensuring he didn't overexert himself. Each step of the way, she remained attentive to his needs, adjusting the plan as necessary. Her preparations extended beyond the practical. Lucia knew that Nova's story was not just about physical recovery. It was a testament to resilience and the power of second chances. She wanted their journey to inspire others, to show that with enough care and determination, even the most overlooked and dismissed could rise to greatness. As the first signs of winter crept into the air, Lucia and Nova's bond had become unbreakable. Together, they stood poised on the brink of a new chapter, ready to face whatever lay ahead. The journey was far from over, but for the first time in a long while, the future seemed full of promise. The day dawned cool and crisp, with a gentle mist hanging over the competition grounds. Riders and their horses gathered, their polished saddles and gleaming coats a testament to the rigorous preparation for this moment. In stark contrast stood Nova, a horse whose past was written in scars and a faded coat, yet whose spirit now shone with undeniable resilience. Lucia adjusted Nova's bridle one last time, her hands steady despite the nerves fluttering in her chest. "We've got this, boy," she murmured, patting his neck. Nova let out a soft huff, as if in agreement. As they entered the arena, whispers rippled through the crowd. Nova's transformation was evident, yet the shadow of his past lingered in their judgments. Opponents cast skeptical glances, some smirking at the sight of the once-rejected horse now standing among their prime competitors. The announcer's voice boomed through the air, introducing each contestant. When he reached Nova, there was a pause before he declared, "And now, Nova, a surprising entry. A horse many thought had no future." A few chuckles erupted, but Lucia kept her gaze ahead, her confidence unshaken. The first challenge loomed, a series of high hurdles requiring precision and power. Nova hesitated, his hooves shifting uneasily as he approached the first jump. The murmurs of the crowd grew louder, a mixture of doubt and derision. Lucia leaned forward slightly, her voice calm and encouraging. "It's just you and me, Nova. We've done this before. One step at a time." Nova's ears flicked back toward her, catching the reassurance. With a powerful push, he leapt over the first hurdle. The crowd's laughter faltered, replaced by a tentative hum of interest. Nova's initial hesitation had given way to a steady rhythm as he tackled the subsequent jumps. Each successful leap seemed to bolster his confidence, his movements growing more fluid and assertive. Lucia guided him with precision, her own focus unwavering despite the occasional slip in footing. They were in sync, horse and rider moving as one. Midway through the course, a narrow water obstacle tested Nova's courage. He balked slightly, the glint of water beneath the jump causing him to pause. A snicker rippled through the audience, but Lucia's calm voice cut through. "Trust me, Nova. You can do this." She tightened the reins gently, urging him forward. With a burst of determination, Nova cleared the water, his landing solid and sure. The crowd's response shifted, applause beginning to replace the earlier scoffs. As they neared the final stretch, Nova's energy seemed to surge. The other horses, powerful and well-trained, had maintained the lead throughout the course, but Nova was closing in. The last obstacle, a steep incline leading to a jump through a narrow gate, was a test of strength and agility. Lucia whispered softly, her words a blend of encouragement and trust. Nova charged forward, his strides lengthening with every step. With a mighty leap, he cleared the gate and landed gracefully, his momentum carrying him past the other horses. The finish line approached in a blur of hooves and dust. Nova's speed was unmatched in those final moments. As he crossed the line first, the arena fell silent, the weight of disbelief hanging in the air. Then, as if on cue, the crowd erupted into cheers. Nova, the horse once deemed unworthy, had defied all odds. Lucia dismounted, her hands trembling slightly as she patted Nova's neck. Tears pricked her eyes, but she blinked them away, focusing instead on the moment. Across the arena, Alaric, Nova's former owner, stood stone-faced. His prized stallion had finished far behind, and the sight of Nova basking in the glory of victory seemed to gnaw at him. Yet Lucia paid him no mind. Her victory wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It was about proving Nova's worth and potential. When approached by reporters eager to capture her story, Lucia spoke with quiet determination. Nova's win isn't just about today. It's about second chances, about seeing beyond what's broken to what can be rebuilt. Her words resonated, drawing admiration from the crowd and deepening the impact of her achievement. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Lucia made a decision. The prize money wasn't hers to keep. It was a means to a greater end. She envisioned a sanctuary, a place where horses like Nova could find healing and purpose. Her dream began to take shape as she shared the idea with her grandfather, Raphael. Together, they sketched plans for a rehabilitation center that would offer rejected and injured horses the same hope Nova had found. The foundation of this vision was built not just on Nova's triumph, but on the bond between horse and rider, forged through trials and triumphs. For Lucia, this wasn't the end of a journey, but the start of a mission, one driven by compassion and the unwavering belief that even the discarded deserved a chance to shine. The morning light poured over the rolling hills as Lucia stood on the edge of the old barnyard, surveying the progress she and Raphael had made. The structure, once sagging under the weight of time and neglect, now gleamed with fresh paint. The fences had been mended, and a new stable stood tall and sturdy, ready to welcome its first guests. Lucia had worked tirelessly, not just to restore her family's ranch, but to transform it into something greater, a sanctuary for the forgotten, the wounded, and the hopeless. Hope's Horizon, she called it, because every life deserved a chance to see a better tomorrow. With Raphael's wisdom guiding her, the center took shape faster than she had imagined. He knew which timber to cut, how to strengthen the old beams, and where to source affordable materials. Despite his gruff exterior, there was a pride in his voice as he explained each task to Lucia. "This ranch has been in our family for generations," he said one evening, the firelight casting shadows on his weathered face. "If you're going to build something new here, you'd better make it last." Nova stood nearby, his coat shimmering in the fading sunlight. Once fragile and forgotten, he now exuded strength and dignity. As if sensing Raphael's words, Nova tossed his head and snorted softly, drawing a laugh from Lucia. "He agrees," she said, patting Nova's neck. It didn't take long for Nova to become the symbol of Hope's Horizon. Visitors who heard about the sanctuary's mission came to see the legendary horse that had defied the odds. Nova would stand at the fence line, his proud stance captivating everyone who saw him. Children ran their fingers through his mane, and adults marveled at his transformation. For many, Nova's story was a testament to resilience and the power of second chances. The influx of attention brought more than admiration. Stories of Nova and Hope's Horizon spread through local papers and eventually caught the attention of larger outlets. Donations trickled in, then poured, allowing Lucia to expand her efforts. More horses arrived, skinny mares, battered stallions, and even foals abandoned too soon. Each one had a story, and each one found care and compassion at Hope's Horizon. Lucia worked tirelessly, alongside Raphael and a growing team of volunteers. Days blended into nights as they fed, groomed, and rehabilitated the horses. Raphael's experience was invaluable. He taught Lucia how to recognize the subtle signs of a horse's recovery, the flicker of curiosity in their eyes, or the steady rhythm of their steps. Clara, a close friend of Lucia, joined the effort too, bringing a contagious optimism that kept everyone's spirits high. But not everyone looked upon Hope's Horizon with kindness. Alaric, the man who had once dismissed Nova as worthless, had been watching from the shadows. Seeing Nova's rise to fame and the success of the sanctuary filled him with a quiet bitterness. To Alaric, Nova was no longer just a horse. He was a missed opportunity, a golden ticket that had slipped through his fingers. Alaric's envy festered, and his thoughts turned to how he might reclaim what he believed was rightfully his. He began to frequent the ranch under the guise of casual visits, his sharp eyes scanning the property. Each time, he would linger by Nova's paddock, his gaze lingering too long. One afternoon, as Lucia was guiding a young couple through the sanctuary, Alaric approached. He was dressed sharply, a confident smile stretched across his face. "Lucia," he began smoothly, "you've built quite the operation here. I can see Nova's done well for you." Lucia's guard went up immediately. "Hope's Horizon is about more than Nova," she replied, keeping her tone polite but firm. "It's about giving all these animals a second chance." "Of course," Alaric said, his smile never wavering. "But Nova, he's special, a champion. I've been thinking. I could make you an offer, a generous one. Name your price, and I'll take Nova off your hands. Imagine what you could do for the sanctuary with that kind of money." Lucia stared at him, the weight of his words sinking in. She knew what Nova represented, not just to her, but to everyone who walked through the gates of Hope's Horizon. Selling him would be more than a betrayal. It would shatter the very foundation of what she had built. "Nova isn't for sale," she said, her voice steady. Alaric's smile faltered, but only for a moment. "Think about it," he said, turning to leave. "I'll be back. This kind of opportunity doesn't come around twice." As Alaric's figure disappeared down the dirt road, a chill settled over Lucia. She knew he wouldn't give up easily, and the sanctuary she had worked so hard to build was now under a shadow of uncertainty. That night, as she stood by Nova's paddock, the horse nuzzled her shoulder. Lucia rested her hand on his neck, drawing strength from his quiet presence. No matter what challenges lay ahead, she resolved to protect Nova and the sanctuary at all costs. The work continued at Hope's Horizon, but the air was different. Volunteers noticed the tension in Lucia's smile and the way Raphael kept a watchful eye on the property. Clara tried to lighten the mood, but even she sensed the unease. Alaric's visits became less frequent, but his absence was no comfort. It only made Lucia wonder what he was planning. Despite the uncertainty, she clung to the belief that Hope's Horizon was stronger than any threat. After all, it had already risen from nothing to become a beacon of hope. And as long as Nova stood by her side, she knew they could face anything. The air was thick with unease when Alaric arrived at Hope's Horizon. His black SUV kicked up a plume of dust as it rolled to a stop near the stable. Lucia stood by the paddock, her hands resting on the weathered wood of the fence, her gaze fixed on Nova, grazing peacefully in the distance. She didn't turn around until she heard the car door slam shut. "Lucia," Alaric greeted, his voice smooth yet heavy with condescension. He adjusted the cuffs of his tailored jacket as he walked toward her. "I thought we could talk business." Lucia's expression hardened. She knew Alaric's reputation for manipulation and underhanded deals. "If this is about Nova, you're wasting your time," she said firmly, her eyes never leaving his. Alaric chuckled, a sound that lacked any warmth. "Come now, Lucia. Every horse has its price. I'm prepared to offer you a figure that'll make this little ranch of yours flourish. Name it." Lucia crossed her arms, her voice steady. "Nova isn't for sale. This ranch isn't for sale. I didn't save him just to hand him over to someone like you." For a moment, Alaric's mask of charm faltered, replaced by a flicker of irritation. "You're making a mistake," he warned, his tone sharp. "Don't let sentiment blind you to opportunity." Lucia stepped closer, her words measured but unwavering. "It's not sentiment, Alaric. It's principle. Nova isn't just a horse to me. He's a part of what we're building here, a symbol of second chances. You can't put a price on that." Alaric's jaw tightened, but he offered a tight smile. "Very well. Have it your way," he said, turning back to his car. The threat in his voice was subtle but clear. "Let's hope you don't regret it." The days following Alaric's visit were unsettling. The first incident occurred 2 nights later. Lucia woke to the frantic whinnies of horses and rushed outside to find the main gate to the paddock wide open. Several of the horses had bolted into the darkness, their tracks leading toward the woods. Nova stood in the center of the paddock, his ears pinned back and his body tense, as if sensing danger. Clara arrived before dawn to help. "It's too much of a coincidence, don't you think?" she asked, tightening the strap of her flashlight. Lucia nodded grimly. Alaric didn't get what he wanted. This feels like his way of sending a message. Over the next week, the sabotage escalated. Fence posts were sawn through and left to collapse. Water troughs were overturned. The small feed storage shed was ransacked, leaving supplies scattered and spoiled. Each incident left Lucia more certain of Alaric's involvement, but without proof, she couldn't confront him directly. Determined not to let fear cripple her efforts, Lucia called a meeting with the ranch's supporters. Neighbors, friends, and volunteers gathered in the barn, their faces a mix of concern and resolve. "We can't let whoever's behind this win," she said, her voice firm despite the exhaustion etched in her features. "Hope's Horizon stands for something bigger than any one of us, and we need to protect it together." Clara stepped forward, her hands on her hips. "We'll take shifts patrolling the property. If they're bold enough to come back, we'll be ready." One by one, others offered their help. An older couple from a nearby farm donated extra wood and nails to reinforce the fences. A group of local teenagers volunteered to watch over the paddocks during the night. Even Raphael, usually content to work quietly in the background, took on the task of repairing the water system. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Lucia stood outside the barn, watching Clara and a few others set up a makeshift watchtower near the main gate. Nova stood nearby, his presence a calming force amidst the chaos. Lucia reached out to stroke his mane, her voice low. "We'll get through this, boy. We've come too far to let anyone take this away." As the first stars appeared in the sky, the ranch hummed with quiet determination. People moved with purpose, their shared belief in Hope's Horizon binding them together. The threat of Alaric loomed, but Lucia's resolve was stronger. She knew they were building something worth fighting for. The night was unusually quiet, with only the faint rustle of leaves in the wind and the occasional hoot of an owl in the distance. Lucia had just finished checking on Nova and was about to retire when a muffled noise from the direction of the stables made her freeze in place. It was subtle, almost indistinct, but enough to raise the fine hairs on the back of her neck. Grabbing her flashlight and pulling on her boots, she headed out with Nova trailing behind, his hooves tapping softly on the dirt. The beam of her flashlight cut through the dark as she approached the stable, her steps cautious yet deliberate. The air carried a tense stillness, broken only by the occasional metallic clatter that grew louder as she neared. Rounding the corner, the scene came into sharp focus. Alaric, along with two accomplices, was bent over the fence, sawing at the wood while muttering in hushed tones. A sharp intake of breath escaped her before she could stop herself. "What on earth do you think you're doing?" Her voice rang out, firm and unyielding, cutting through the night like a whip. The men jerked upright, startled by the sudden confrontation. Alaric turned, his face caught in the flashlight's glare, a mask of anger and guilt. He recovered quickly, though, his mouth twisting into a sneer. "You shouldn't be out here alone, Lucia," he said, taking a slow step forward. Lucia held her ground, her heart pounding, but her resolve unwavering. "Don't try to intimidate me, Alaric. You're trespassing, and I've had enough of your games. Leave now before I call the sheriff." His sneer deepened as he signaled the other men, but the tension shifted when Nova let out a loud, sharp snort behind her, his presence like a silent guardian. The noise seemed to unnerve the intruders momentarily, giving Lucia a sliver of time. "You think you can scare me with this circus act?" Alaric lunged forward, but the sudden shouts of voices from the neighboring properties stopped him in his tracks. The beams of flashlights and the sound of approaching footsteps filled the air as Clara and several neighbors arrived, drawn by the commotion. "Caught you red-handed, didn't we?" Clara's voice cut through the dark, her phone held up, its camera recording everything. Alaric swore under his breath, throwing an accusatory glare at Lucia. "This isn't over," he hissed, before motioning for his men to retreat. They disappeared into the shadows, their plan thwarted, but their malice lingering in the air. By morning, the once tense atmosphere at the ranch had shifted into a hum of determined energy. Clara handed over the footage to Lucia, and together they made their way to the local sheriff's office. The evidence was damning, and the sheriff, a no-nonsense man with a soft spot for justice, assured Lucia that action would be taken. Back at the ranch, neighbors gathered to show their support. They offered statements to back up Lucia's claims, recounting their own observations of suspicious activity in the area. With their collective voices amplifying the truth, Alaric's schemes began to unravel under scrutiny. Days later, news broke that Alaric had been formally charged. The weight of the community's pressure and the clear evidence left him with no room for escape. As word spread, Lucia's name became synonymous with resilience and justice. The people around her began to see her not just as a caretaker for Nova, but as a fierce protector of the values the ranch symbolized. Lucia stood by the fence one evening, her gaze fixed on the horizon as Nova grazed peacefully nearby. Clara joined her, a satisfied smile playing on her lips. "You've done something remarkable, you know," Clara said. Lucia nodded thoughtfully. "It wasn't just me," she replied. "It was everyone who believed in what we're building here." As the sun dipped below the hills, painting the sky in hues of gold and purple, the ranch stood as a testament to determination and unity, a beacon of hope against the darkness of greed and malice. And in that moment, Lucia knew the battle they had fought wasn't just about protecting the ranch. It was about preserving the heart and soul of everything it stood for. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm golden light over the rolling fields of Hope's horizon. Lucia stood by Nova's paddock, her hands resting on the wooden fence that had once enclosed a fragile, trembling horse. Now, the paddock was empty, a quiet testament to the life of a creature that had defied all odds. Nova had been her companion, her teacher, and her greatest challenge. The end had come peacefully, as if Nova himself knew his time had arrived. Lucia had held his head in her lap, her hand stroking his coarse mane, whispering softly about the journey they had shared. In the days that followed, the quietness of the ranch felt different. It wasn't the absence of Nova's hooves striking the ground or his occasional snorts that made the silence heavier. It was the sense that an era had ended. Determined to honor his legacy, Lucia worked tirelessly on a memorial. She chose a spot beneath the largest oak tree near the paddock, where Nova had often rested in the shade. With the help of the ranch hands, she crafted a simple yet elegant monument. The plaque read, "Nova, the horse that taught us hope." Months later, during one of the ranch's annual gatherings, Lucia stood before a crowd that had come to see what Hope's Horizon was all about. Families with children, local farmers, and even visitors from out of state filled the barnyard, their conversations a low hum of curiosity. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the barn, Lucia stepped onto a small wooden platform. Her voice carried easily, calm and steady as she recounted Nova's story. She spoke of the auction, the mocking laughter, and the fragile horse no one wanted. She described the early days when Nova could barely stand and the long nights she spent nursing him back to health. The crowd listened, some nodding, others wiping away quiet tears. She paused and looked over the gathering, her gaze soft but resolute. "What Nova taught me," she said, "is that what the world sees as broken can often become something extraordinary if we just give it a chance." When she finished, there was a moment of silence before the crowd erupted into applause. Some approached her afterward, sharing their own stories of perseverance and faith. For the younger guests, Nova's tale became a lesson in compassion. To the older visitors, it was a reminder that redemption and second chances weren't just for the young. Hope's Horizon had grown beyond Lucia's wildest dreams. The ranch now hosted educational programs where children learned not just about horses, but about resilience and empathy. Volunteers from across the region came to help with the daily tasks, bringing with them their own stories of struggle and triumph. Even visitors who knew little of Nova before their arrival left inspired, carrying with them a piece of his legacy. Lucia often thought about how far the ranch had come. The fields, once barren and quiet, were now alive with activity and laughter. At the heart of it all was Nova, whose story had become the foundation upon which the ranch thrived. His spirit lingered in the people who came to the ranch, in the horses that found refuge there, and in the values it represented. One clear, starlit evening, long after the last visitor had left, Lucia stood in the field, gazing up at the sky. The ranch lay quiet now, the only sounds the soft rustle of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl. She thought of Nova, his strength, his determination, and the way he'd brought out the best in everyone around him. She closed her eyes, allowing the cool breeze to wash over her. "You taught us so much, Nova," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the night's gentle symphony. "With love and determination, anything is possible." The stars seemed to shine a little brighter as if answering her words. Lucia turned back toward the house, her heart full. Nova's story would live on, not just in the memorial beneath the oak tree or in the lessons taught at the ranch. It would endure in every person who found hope and strength at hope's horizon, a place built on the belief that even the broken could shine.